A German shepherd barked fiercely at a huge lump on an old tree. Officer Daniel cut it open and froze. Inside was a secret that would shatter Cedar Falls' peace and expose a deadly network of corruption. One dog's loyalty would uncover decades of lies, danger, and murder, changing everything in the town forever. Before we move on, if you're an animal lover, tap subscribe. It's completely free, and every click inspires us to keep sharing the stories that truly touch the heart and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. The town of Marlow sat quietly on the edge of dense woodlands, where the trees leaned close together, whispering with the wind. It was the kind of place where people rarely expected surprises, until one summer afternoon when a German shepherd named Duke began barking furiously at an ancient oak that towered over the park. At first, his handler, Officer Daniel Ross, thought it was just another squirrel or raccoon. Duke, a trained canine, was sharp, disciplined, and rarely wrong. His barks weren't playful this time. They were urgent, sharp, demanding. Something about the massive lump protruding from the old oak's trunk had locked Duke's attention. Daniel tugged at the leash. "Easy, boy. It's just a tree." But Duke wouldn't budge. His body stiffened, his tail lowered, and his deep growls vibrated like warnings. People passing through the park slowed to watch. An elderly man shook his head. "That tree's been there for generations. Never seen a dog act like that around it." A mother gathered her children and pulled them away, unsettled. Daniel crouched, inspecting the bark. The lump looked unnatural, almost as if the tree had grown around something that didn't belong. He reached out and tapped the bulge. It gave off a hollow echo. Duke barked louder, pawing at the roots. His nails scraped at the soil as if he was trying to dig something out. Daniel frowned. In his 10 years on the force, he had trusted Duke more than most people. The dog had saved him from ambushes, found missing children, and sniffed out weapons no one else could detect. If Duke insisted something was wrong, Daniel had learned not to doubt it. "All right," he muttered, pulling out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Ross. I've got a situation in Willow Park. Might need a unit and some equipment for possible evidence extraction." There was a pause. Then static. "Copy that, Ross." "Evidence from a tree." The operator's voice held a touch of disbelief. Daniel glanced down at Duke, who was now whining, ears pinned back, nose pressed against the oak as if begging his partner to understand. "Trust me. Send someone." By the time backup arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Parents whispered. Teenagers took videos on their phones. The lump was big enough to make anyone uneasy. It bulged from the trunk like the tree was hiding a tumor. Its bark stretched taut and cracked in places. Sergeant Miller walked up with 2 other officers. "Ross, you better have a good reason for this." "Duke found it," Daniel replied simply. That alone made Miller's jaw tighten. Everyone in the precinct knew Duke's instincts were never wrong. The officers cleared the civilian's back as Daniel placed a gloved hand on the bulge once more. The hollow sound seemed louder this time, as if whatever was inside was straining to be discovered. Miller handed him a hatchet. "If you're sure, make the cut." Daniel hesitated, his grip tightening. Duke whined again, low and urgent. With one deep breath, Daniel swung. The blade sank into the bark with a dull crack. Splinters flew. The crowd gasped. The moment the wood split, a smell seeped out, musty, metallic, unnatural. Daniel's stomach tightened. He struck again, the hollow echo cracking open wider. The tree seemed to groan as it surrendered its secret. Suddenly, Duke lunged forward, snarling. The crowd jumped back. Daniel steadied himself and struck harder, tearing open a jagged hole in the trunk. What he saw inside made his blood run cold. His hands froze mid-swing. His breath hitched. Behind the splintered bark was not just wood. There was something else. Something human-shaped. Gasps erupted from behind the police tape. Miller muttered under his breath. "Dear God." Daniel couldn't move. His mind struggled to process what lay entombed within the oak. Duke pressed against his leg, growling at the darkness inside as if he had always known what was hidden there. And for the first time in years, Officer Daniel Ross felt real fear. The crowd held its breath. The hole Daniel had cut gaped like a wound in the oak's side, shadows curling inside it. His flashlight beam trembled as it pierced the darkness. A pale shape glistened within. At first it looked like stone, but when Daniel leaned closer, the truth clawed its way into his mind. It was bone. Human bone. His throat closed. It's a body. Gasps rippled through the park. Mothers clutched their children. A man muttered, "All these years inside the tree?" Sergeant Miller's face drained of color. He barked at the other officers, "Secure the area. Get forensics here now." But Daniel barely heard him. He was locked on the half-decayed figure cradled by roots and bark. The tree hadn't just grown around it, it had swallowed it whole. Duke whimpered, pushing his nose toward the opening as if urging Daniel to pull the person out, to free them at last. Daniel whispered, "Easy, boy. We'll get them out." His voice broke on the last word. Within the hour, the scene transformed into a flood of sirens, flashing lights, and murmurs. Forensic vans pulled up, yellow tapes stretched across the grass, and specialists in white suits swarmed the oak. The medical examiner, Dr. Patel, arrived with her kit. She crouched by the opening, peering into the jagged cavity. Her gloved hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her mask. "My God, this isn't recent. Whoever this was, they've been here for decades." "Decades?" Daniel echoed. Patel nodded grimly. The tree grew around them. "Look, roots wrapping the ribs, bark fused with the skull. The oak has been feeding on them, in a way." The words twisted Daniel's stomach. He stared at the figure, half human, half tree. A secret the forest had held in silence until Duke uncovered it. Reporters began arriving, cameras flashing from behind the police tape. Miller cursed under his breath. "This is going to be a circus. Ross, keep Duke under control. The last thing we need is headlines about a dog going crazy at a crime scene." But Duke wasn't crazy. His eyes locked on the remains with unshakable intensity. He barked once, sharp and commanding, as if saying, "Don't ignore this. There's more here." Patel's team carefully widened the hole, using saws and chisels instead of axes now. Inch by inch, they revealed the body inside. The figure was curled unnaturally, arms wrapped around something pressed against its chest. Patel leaned in, squinting. "Wait, there's something else here." The crowd grew louder. Questions flew. Miller snapped at the officers, "Silence that crowd." Daniel crouched beside Patel, his flashlight beam steady. The bark fell away, and beneath the skeleton's arms, something metallic glinted. A small tin box. Rusted, dented, but still sealed. Patel whispered, "They were protecting it." Even in death, Daniel's pulse hammered. He reached toward the box, but Patel held up a hand. "Not yet. We need to document everything." "But Ross, whatever's in here, someone wanted it hidden for a very long time." Duke barked again, more urgent, his entire body vibrating with tension. Daniel rested a hand on his fur. The shepherd's heart was racing beneath his palm. He knew Duke well enough to understand. The dog wasn't just alerting to the corpse. He sensed danger. The crowd's murmurs turned to speculation. Is it a murder victim? Could it be some kind of cult? What's in the box? Reporters shouted questions, flashes snapping like lightning. Miller growled, "Shut this whole place down. No one in or out until we know what we're dealing with." But it was too late. The story had already escaped, carried on whispers and phone recordings. Daniel stayed rooted by the oak, staring into the hollow. The skeletal hands clutching the box, the way the tree had sealed the secret away, it all felt deliberate, intentional, like the forest itself had been guarding the truth. Patel carefully worked the box free. As it came loose, a deep crack ran through the oak, a groan echoing as if the tree itself protested. Splinters rained down. People screamed and stumbled back. Duke lunged, barking furiously at the splitting wood. Daniel yanked him back, heart pounding. Patel held the box aloft, her gloves smeared with dust and fragments of bark. She turned to Daniel, eyes wide behind her mask. "We'll open it at the lab. But whatever this is, it could explain everything." The oak creaked again, another crack splitting its trunk. For one chilling moment, Daniel thought the whole thing might collapse. The crowd scattered farther back, voices rising in panic. But the tree held. Silent once more, its terrible secret exposed. Daniel looked down at Duke, who was still staring at the box with a low, throaty growl. For the first time in his career, Daniel felt like they had uncovered something not just criminal, but unnatural. And deep down, he feared Duke was right. This was only the beginning. The ride back to headquarters was cloaked in silence, broken only by the hum of tires on asphalt. The rusted tin box sat in a sealed evidence bag on Dr. Patel's lap, its weight far heavier than metal should allow. Daniel drove with his jaw clenched, knuckles white on the wheel. Duke lay in the back seat, but his eyes never left the box. Every time the car hit a bump, he let out a low growl. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" Daniel whispered. Duke's ears flicked, but his gaze didn't waver. Inside the forensic lab, the air smelled of disinfectant and cold steel. Patel set the box on a table under bright lights. Officers and technicians gathered, tension pressing down on every chest. Sergeant Miller folded his arms. "All right, Patel. Open it. Let's end this guessing game." Patel slipped on fresh gloves. The box was corroded, its hinges stiff with rust. It took a set of tools and careful prying before the lid finally creaked open. The room leaned in. Inside lay a collection of yellowed papers, bound with string, and beneath them, a small leather diary, its cover cracked with age. A faint smell of smoke and earth drifted out, as if the forest itself clung to these secrets. Patel carefully lifted the diary. Its pages were brittle, ink faded but legible. The first line made her throat tighten. "If anyone finds this, know that I was not meant to disappear. The truth is buried deeper than the roots of this tree." Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's pulse spiked. Miller snapped. "Whose handwriting is that? Can we identify the victim?" Patel flipped through more pages. Names appeared, dates, notes, mentions of meetings. Some were coded, others plain. But one name leapt out repeatedly, underlined in frantic ink. W. Harland. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Harland, that's the name of the old mayor. He went missing 40 years ago. Miller froze. "You're telling me that's Harland in the tree?" Patel's gaze shifted to the skeletal remains documented back at the oak. "It matches. Height, age range fits him." Shock rippled through the room. A missing mayor, presumed dead, now revealed decades later, entombed in an oak with his diary and coded notes. Daniel rubbed his temples. Why would he hide this in a tree? And who put him there? Duke growled again, teeth bared at the open box. Daniel glanced at him uneasily. The dog's instincts screamed louder than words. Danger still lingered. Patel pulled more from the box. Photographs, edges curled. Black and white shots of men in suits, gathered in dimly lit rooms. Some faces were familiar from old archives. City council members, businessmen, even a police chief from decades ago. Miller cursed. This is a conspiracy. Harland was documenting something big. One photo chilled Daniel to the bone. Men standing before the same oak tree, their hands pressed against it like a ritual. Harland stood apart, his expression tense. Patel whispered, "These weren't just meetings. This looks like some kind of secret society." The air thickened. The diary pages detailed accusations, corruption, bribes, threats. Harland had uncovered it all and hidden the evidence. His last entry sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. "They know I have proof. If I disappear, look to the oak. The tree remembers." The room fell silent. Miller slammed a hand on the table. "We're reopening this case. Ross, Patel, you're leading it. But no word leaves this lab until we know what we're up against." Daniel nodded, though unease twisted in his gut. The conspiracy wasn't dead, it had just been waiting. That night, Daniel returned home with Duke. He couldn't shake the image of Harland's skeletal hands clutching the box. Someone had silenced him. And if the diary was right, the same shadows still stretched over Marlowe. Duke paced restlessly, ears pricked, as if listening to ghosts Daniel couldn't hear. Finally, the shepherd sat by the door, staring out into the darkness beyond the porch. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Daniel joined him, hand resting on his partner's head. "What is it, boy? You think they're still out there, don't you?" Duke didn't blink. His gaze stayed fixed on the tree lean. And Daniel realized with a chill that the dog wasn't just sensing the past. He was warning of the future. The shadows weren't finished. Not yet. The following morning, Marlowe was buzzing with rumors. Though the lab had sworn silence, whispers had already leaked about a body in the tree, about a box of secrets. The small town, long asleep under the illusion of peace, stirred uneasily. Daniel arrived at headquarters with Duke at his side. The German shepherd's amber eyes scanned every corner, every face, as though expecting danger to leap from the shadows. He was restless, pacing at Daniel's desk while the detective sifted through the diary again. The words haunted him. "They know I have proof. If I disappear, look to the oak." Patel entered carrying fresh analysis. The handwriting matches Mayor Harlan's known signatures. The photos date to the late 1970s. But it's the chemical residue on the box that worries me. Daniel frowned. Residue? Patel nodded. Traces of accelerants. Whoever buried that box didn't just want it hidden. They considered burning it. Before Daniel could reply, Sergeant Miller stormed in. His face was pale, jaw tight. "Ross, Patel, we've got a problem. Someone broke into the evidence locker last night." Daniel shot up. "The box." Miller shook his head grimly. "Still here. But the photos, half of them are gone." The room went cold. Patel whispered, "They know we found it." Daniel felt Duke stiffen at his side. The shepherd's growl rumbled like distant thunder, hackles raised. He was reacting not to the humans in the room, but to something deeper, the scent of fear, of betrayal. Miller continued, "We're locking everything down, but Ross, I don't have to tell you, this is bigger than us." If Harlan was right, men in power were involved. Men still in power. Daniel clenched his fists. "Then we exposed them. All of them." That evening, Daniel drove out to Harlan's old estate, abandoned since his disappearance. Vines choked the fences, windows sagged under decades of dust. Duke leapt from the truck, nose low, tail stiff. He moved cautiously, sniffing the ground, as if following the echo of a trail long cold. Inside, the house smelled of mold and lost years. But in the study, papers still littered the shelves, newspapers, maps, handwritten notes. Daniel scanned them under his flashlight. Dates circled, meetings logged. And again, the same phrase scribbled in the margins, "The tree remembers." Suddenly, Duke barked sharply, claws skittering on warped wood. He stood rigid before the fireplace, teeth bared. Daniel followed his gaze. There, above the mantel, a portrait of Harlan hung crooked. Behind it, the faint outline of a wall safe. Daniel's pulse raced. He pried it open, half expecting nothing. Instead, he found another bundle of papers, untouched by time. But before he could read, headlights cut across the broken windows. An engine idled outside. Daniel doused his flashlight, crouching low. Duke pressed close, silent now, trained body tense like a coiled spring. Footsteps crunched gravel. More than one pair. Muffled voices drifted in. "Check the study. He'll come here. We can't let him leave with anything." Daniel's throat went dry. Someone had followed him, and they weren't there to talk. He stuffed the papers into his jacket, signaling Duke to stay quiet. The German shepherd obeyed, eyes fixed on the doorway. The floor creaked outside the room. A shadow passed. Then another. Daniel's hand slid to his holster. Duke crouched low, muscles quivering. The men stepped into the study, flashlights slicing the dark. One wore a sheriff's badge. Daniel's stomach turned cold. This wasn't just outsiders. This was inside the department. "Ross," the deputy said flatly, "you should have left this alone." Duke growled, deep and menacing. The deputy raised his weapon. "Call off the dog." Daniel's heart pounded. "You shoot him, and you'll never leave this house." The standoff hung heavy. The deputy's finger hovered near the trigger, but in that breathless silence, Duke lunged. His bark exploded like a gunshot, his body a blur of fur and fury as he knocked the weapon aside. The gun clattered across the floor. Chaos erupted. Another man grabbed Daniel, shoving him against the wall. The papers slipped from his jacket, scattering like fallen leaves. The deputy cursed, reaching for them. Daniel fought back, elbows driving, fists striking, but he was outnumbered. Duke snapped and snarled, holding one assailant down, but another raised a crowbar high, aimed straight for the shepherd's skull. "No!" Daniel roared, throwing himself between them. The crowbar glanced off his shoulder, pain flaring white-hot. Duke whirled, teeth flashing, driving the attacker back with raw force. Blood darkened his muzzle, but his eyes burned with loyalty, unyielding. Sirens wailed suddenly in the distance. Tires on gravel. Headlights multiplied. The attackers froze. "Grab what you can, we're done here," one hissed. They snatched a handful of pages and bolted, vanishing into the night just as squad cars screeched into the driveway. Daniel collapsed against the wall, gasping, shoulder throbbing. Papers lay strewn, half lost. Duke pressed against him, whining softly, blood matting his fur but his body unbowed. Daniel wrapped an arm around his partner. "You saved me again, boy. Always you." He looked down at the scraps of paper still in his grip. One line, jagged and hurried, glared up at him. "The Brotherhood will never fall. The roots run deeper than the oak." Daniel's stomach turned. This wasn't just about Harland. This was about something still alive, still powerful, and willing to kill to protect itself. And Duke, faithful as ever, had already placed himself on the front line of a war they didn't yet understand. The next morning, Marlowe seemed deceptively calm. Shops opened, children played in the park, and the scent of baking bread drifted through the air. But Daniel knew the calm was fragile, a thin veneer over a town still haunted by old crimes. Duke stayed close, ears pricked, tail stiff as he padded silently beside Daniel. In the dim light of the detective's office, Daniel spread the recovered papers across his desk. Handwritten notes, photos, receipts, fragments of a puzzle that had been buried for decades. Every piece pointed to a web of corruption that ran from City Hall to the outskirts of town, a network still active despite years of silence. Duke's low growl interrupted Daniel's focus. The shepherd's nose twitched as he sniffed the office doorway. Daniel froze. Someone was outside. The door swung open with a crash. A figure in a dark coat stepped in, weapon drawn. "Detective Ross," the man said smoothly. "I think you've uncovered more than you should." Daniel reacted instinctively, drawing his gun, but Duke was already in motion. The shepherd lunged forward, teeth snapping, knocking the intruder's arm aside just as he fired. The bullet shattered a window, glass spraying across the room. "Get him," another voice shouted. Daniel's heart pounded as more men poured in. They weren't ordinary criminals. They moved with coordination, precision, the kind of training that suggested deep resources. Duke snapped, hurting each attacker with calculated ferocity. His growls, sharp and commanding, filled the room. Daniel fired only when necessary, but it was Duke who turned the tide, forcing the intruders back with relentless courage. One man, bigger than the rest, lunged toward the desk. He grabbed the papers and began ripping them, crumpling years of evidence. Daniel charged, tackling him to the floor. The two struggled, rolling across the hardwood, each hit landing like fire against his chest. Duke intercepted another, pinning him down. Blood streaked the shepherd's muzzle, but his amber eyes were fierce and unwavering. Daniel caught his breath, glancing around the office. The floor was littered with torn documents, broken glass, and the scent of adrenaline. Suddenly, a voice from the shadows stopped everyone. "Enough." It was calm, chilling in its authority. The men froze, glancing nervously toward the doorway. Daniel squinted. An elderly figure emerged, silver hair slicked back, eyes sharp as a hawk. "Detective Ross," the man said. "You have no idea what you're meddling in." Daniel stood, gun steady. "I know enough to end this." The old man laughed, slow and deliberate. "End this? You're barely scratching the surface. The Brotherhood isn't just a story. They're alive, in power, in business, in law enforcement. They won't stop. And neither will I." Duke barked, tense beside Daniel. He seemed to sense the weight of the threat, his muscles coiled, ready to strike. "You can't protect everything, Ross," the man continued. "Some truths are too dangerous, some people too expendable. Leave the papers. Walk away, or more than your life will be at stake." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You killed, you silenced, and you terrorized this town for decades. That ends now. Duke and I aren't walking away." The old man's expression hardened. "So be it," he signaled. The men in dark coats advanced. Daniel gritted his teeth. Duke growled, a sound that rumbled deep in his chest. warning the intruders of consequences they couldn't comprehend. Chaos erupted. The room became a blur of movement. Daniel ducking, shooting, striking, while Duke moved with fluid precision, guarding his human, neutralizing threats, and herding the attackers toward the windows and broken doors. A crash outside drew everyone's attention. One intruder tried to escape, but Duke intercepted him mid-step, jaws clamping on the arm, teeth sinking through leather. The man screamed, dropping the stolen papers. Daniel seized the moment, tackling the leader. The two men grappled violently, Daniel straining every muscle, but Duke stayed at his side, watching, ready, unwavering. Finally, sirens echoed through the streets. Local police, alerted by Patel, swarmed the building. The remaining intruders panicked, scattering into the night. Daniel sank to his knees, hands shaking, lungs burning. Duke pressed against him, his body warm, his loyalty absolute. Amber eyes met Daniel's, communicating relief, understanding, and trust beyond words. The old man had vanished into the night, leaving only fragments of the Brotherhood's shadow behind. The papers, partially destroyed but still valuable, lay scattered. Evidence enough to continue the fight, to expose corruption that had long been buried. Daniel held Duke close. "We'll finish this," he whispered. "I promise you, boy. No one else will suffer because of them." Duke wagged his tail weakly, eyes still alert, as if agreeing. The battle wasn't over, but the shepherd's courage and Daniel's determination had bought them a crucial advantage. The roots of corruption were deep, but together they would dig them out. The early morning fog clung to Cedar Falls like a shroud. Daniel stood outside the precinct, Duke at his side, amber eyes scanning every shadow. The previous night's chaos had left him exhausted, but the shepherd's unwavering presence reminded him that their mission wasn't complete. Inside the precinct, the shredded papers and recovered files were being cataloged. Evidence collected by Daniel and Duke was now in the hands of federal agents, the beginnings of a nationwide investigation. Each piece revealed layers of corruption, financial fraud, and murder that had stretched across decades. The Brotherhood, once a shadowy legend whispered among law enforcement circles, was now exposed. Duke sniffed at the evidence table, ears pricked. Daniel watched him, pride swelling despite the lingering fatigue. "We did it, boy," he murmured. "This is only the start, but it's enough to stop them from hiding anymore." Federal agents moved quickly. Phone lines were tapped, accounts frozen, and warrants issued. The old man, the elusive mastermind, was identified as Leonard Cross, a former high-ranking official with ties to multiple city councils and law enforcement departments across the state. His decades of manipulation had relied on secrecy and fear, both of which Duke had shattered with his sharp instincts and relentless vigilance. Daniel was called into a secured room for a briefing. "Detective Ross, your contribution has been invaluable," said Agent Sullivan. "Without your tenacity and your dog's intervention, this network might have remained hidden for years. Leonard Cross is apprehended as we speak, and several of his lieutenants have already surrendered." Duke sat at the door, tail wagging faintly, eyes alert. Daniel knelt to scratch behind his ears. "You're a hero, Duke. A true hero." The press would later call it the shepherd who exposed corruption, but Daniel knew it was more than that. Duke had risked everything, fought fearlessly, and led him to the truth when human instincts alone might have failed. Weeks later, the city gathered at the Cedar Falls courthouse for a memorial. It wasn't for a single victim, but for all those who had suffered under the Brotherhood's rule. Families, officers, and community members shared stories of courage, loss, and perseverance. Duke, wearing a custom harness, sat proudly beside Daniel as the chief judge spoke. "Today, we honor not only those who fought for justice, but also the companions who guided them. Detective Ross and his German shepherd, Duke, have shown us the power of loyalty and the importance of standing for truth, even when the path is dangerous." Daniel glanced at Duke, who met his gaze with a calm intelligence. The shepherd's courage had saved lives, prevented further crimes, and ensured that the darkness festering in Cedar Falls could finally be addressed. Months passed. Daniel established a foundation in Duke's honor, dedicated to training service dogs for law enforcement, search and rescue, and investigation work. Young handlers were paired with dogs trained to detect deception, danger, and distress, an enduring legacy of the shepherd who had refused to turn away from peril. One evening, Daniel walked through the city park, Duke by his side. Children laughed and played, unaware of the dangers that had once lurked in the shadows. He paused by a massive oak tree, now marked with a plaque commemorating the victims of the Brotherhood. Duke sniffed the base, tail wagging lightly. "Look at them, boy," Daniel whispered. "They're safe now because of you. Because of us." Duke nudged Daniel's hand, his amber eyes reflecting the setting sun. In that gaze was trust, love, and an unspoken promise that together they could face any darkness. The Brotherhood's web had been unraveled, justice served, and Cedar Falls could begin to heal. But more importantly, Daniel understood something he had known all along. The bond between a man and his dog wasn't just companionship, it was courage, protection, and an unwavering force for truth. As night fell, the stars twinkled above the city. Duke rested at Daniel's feet, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The world felt right, balanced by loyalty and love, courage and truth. Daniel smiled, feeling the weight of relief and purpose settle over him. "We did it, Duke. We really did it." And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that justice and hope could endure.